amendment be disagreed to, and I call the member for Riverina.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And at the outset, I acknowledge the member for Herbert in the chamber and recognise his fine service in uniform and indeed his ongoing contribution to Veterans Affairs and to his community at large since he has resumed life as a civilian. I also acknowledge that today in Brisbane the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicides continues. Acknowledge that Senior Counsel Assisting Kevin Connor SC has said that inquiry hearings will be held in regional centres such as Townsville, so proudly represented by the member for Herbert, as well as Wagga Wagga, my hometown, a city with tri-service representation. Royal Australian Air Force at Forest Hill, Royal Australian Navy at the RAF base, and indeed the home of the soldier, Kapooka, where that long line of car keys stretching back to Gallipoli, and even before that, have marched out of there. Indeed, just the other day, Governor-General David Hurley was the reviewing officer at the latest march out, where 60 or so recruits joined the 350,000 before them, who now and in the past have proudly worn the khaki uniform, and we say thanks to them. Thanks to you for your service. Thanks to you for your sacrifice, and may that long continue and endure. Mr Speaker, I listened carefully to the member for Gorton and heard what he had to say about the total and permanently incapacitated payments. I would say to any veterans listening that don't just listen to what Labor says, observe carefully what Labor does. And I will recall when I first served in this place what Labor did in the defence space, what Labor didn't do in the veteran space. And I'm proud to be part of the government which has provided record investment to defence and very much listen to the needs and wants of our veterans community. As a former Veterans Affairs Minister, I'm very in tune with what veterans have to say, particularly as though I know many veterans not just do their recruit training through Wagga Wagga, not just end up being posted to Wagga Wagga, but indeed return to Wagga Wagga and the Riverina once their military careers are over. And as far as the help being required, if any veteran is seeking to reach out to say that they are not okay, and it's all right to say that you're not okay whether you are in uniform or indeed part of the wider civilian network here in Australia. But for veterans, open arms 1800 011 046. It's a 24-hour line. The Department of Defence all-hours support line 1800 628 036. Deputy Speaker, I'm pleased that when I was the Veterans Affairs Minister, that the defence-centric or veteran-centric reform legislation was put into the parliament. Very important that that piece of legislation for the current and future needs of those who wear and have worn our uniforms. Indeed, at June 30, 2019, the Australian Defence Force comprised about 58,000 permanent, 47,000 men and 11,000 women, 27,500 active reserve personnel across the RAN, the Army and the RAF. And at June 2019, there were more than 290,000 DVA beneficiaries in receipt of pensions, allowances and treatment or pharmaceuticals. And this included about 184,000 veterans and 110,000 dependents. The Veterans Affairs Legislation Amendment exempting disability payments from income testing and other measures Bill 2021 is an important piece of legislation. This bill assists in ensuring some of our most vulnerable veterans will be better assisted, better supported and helped to the point where they require that assistance and we are giving them exactly what they need. It delivers on the government's budget commitments announced in October 2020 and May 2021. And I note that the member for Gorton talked about the delayed budget and the favoured consultants, dripping with sarcasm. This isn't about having a crack at the government. This should be about doing what we need to do in a bipartisan way for our veterans. And I'm pleased that, that Labor will not stand in the way of this bill passing the House of Representatives. This bill implements the recommendations of the review conducted by esteemed public servant David Tune into the adequacy of the TPI payment. This bill includes provisions to exempt disability pension as income under the Social Security Act. These alterations simplify the support system for more than 14,000 veterans and dependents and negate the need for the Defence Force Income Support Supplement. Deputy Speaker, provisions to remove a means test imposed on rent assistance for certain veterans and dependents. About 6,900 veterans and dependents will now become eligible for rent assistance or an increased rate of rent assistance. And this ensures that even under the provisions of acts that are passed and changes that are ultimately made as time goes on, even if a veteran drops, say, $100, that's $100 that they can't make up on. And that, for many veterans, means the difference between having a reasonable life and being on the breadline. It truly does, and that's why we know that the Veterans Affairs legislation amendment is so critical and so time-sensitive as well. It also includes provisions to clarify the existing disability pension is a compensation payment and that it should not be confused with other income support measures such as Centrelink's disability support pension. And it also provides the simplification of indexation arrangements for the disability pension, which is presently an overly complicated bureaucratic process. And if there's one thing I know, and veterans certainly know it, what they don't want is a complicated, intricate bureaucratic process. They want to know that they're going to be supported without having to go through all sorts of rigmarole, without having to go through all sorts of hardship just to get the payments that they so desperately want, need, expect and, most importantly, Deputy Speaker, deserve, because it's their money. It's their money, and they have been sent by us, by the government, by the Commonwealth to do a job. They've done that job proudly. They've done that job diligently. They've sacrificed so much, and that's why this is so important that this pass the House. This bill also includes a measure to implement a 2-year trial of non-liability rehabilitation. This will enable veterans participating in the trial to access DVA rehabilitation services in a more prompt manner, without the need to make a claim for compensation or have to wait for the determination of liability. The government has accepted all of the recommendations of the review undertaken by Mr Tune, and if passed, this bill does give effect and will give effect to changes to meet 4 of these recommendations, they being Defence Force Income Support Allowance be abolished and adjusted disability pension, including the TPI payment and permanent impairment payment under the MRCA, be defined as exempt income under the Social Security law. That is Schedule 1 and Schedule 2. In addition, the disability income rent test should be done away with, should be abolished. This would simplify payment arrangements and allow TPI veterans who are renting to receive Commonwealth rent assistance. The bill also gives effect to changes including the indexation of TPI payment be changed to index the whole payment all at once, rather than in 2 components, that being Schedule 4. This could also apply to the intermediate and extreme disablement adjustment rates of disability pensions. The split indexation mechanism was brought in 2004 as a result of the different indexation mechanisms in place for the general rate and above general rate components, but it is now redundant as the indexation mechanisms were all brought into line back in 2008. Now, the bill also changes the terminology and language in legislation, guidelines and policy documents, which will mean that no longer will there be reference to the TPI pension as a pension, but as a payment. some stakeholders are concerned that the term pension in Schedule 3 implies welfare instead of compensation, and it's not welfare. It is indeed compensation. Feedback received by the government when these measures were introduced and announced in the October 2020 budget was that the measures were supported, and the proposed legislation before the House today is critical because veterans know how important this is. They know how important that every dollar in their account is deserved and needed, and that is why we've listened to that feedback. Of course, we've brought the implementation forward to 1 January 2022 as part of this year's budget, which was handed down in May. Now, veterans will not need to apply for rent assistance. DVA will contact those income support recipients who may be eligible, and we will seek up-to-date rent information from them. Once received, this information will be used to undertake the assessment process of rent assistance, with payments commencing on the first payday following New Year's Day next year. And finally, Mr Speaker, the Senate inquiry recommendation that the government consider increasing the TPI payment, that is, I appreciate what the member for Gorton says. We are indeed in a process of consultation constantly with veterans. We will continue to be the side of politics that listens to veterans, that acts on their concerns. We understand full well the service and sacrifice that they have made, both at home and abroad. We will continue to take on board those discussions, that feedback, and that is why we are bringing forward this particular legislation and those particular payments as part of this legislation, because we know that it is needed, we know that it is expected, and we know that it is deserved. And I just say, finally, to veterans, please know that help is always at hand, whether in mental health support, financial support, because you deserve it and because you have sacrificed so much for and on behalf of our nation. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
I thank the member for Riverina. The question is that the amendment be disagreed